All right, so we are going to be going over the different political events of the Renaissance, seeing who is in power and what are they going to do in their position. Okay, I need to provide a little bit of background in explaining what is the makeup geographically, politically of Italy at this time. Mainly, it's going to be five main regions. Okay, five main duchies or kingdoms or republics. So essentially, um, between these major five areas, we're going to see that war is going to happen between them, disagreements going to happen between these city-states, and it's because of competition, right? They're competing for power throughout Italy, and though it begins with economic competition, right? Later, it's going to revolve to be more cultural and even political, especially. Okay, because the competition exists between these five major powers, they are not going to see a unified Italy as one country until 1870. Okay, so it's going to come much later, centuries later. It's because that they are so strong, independent as city-states. They are financial centers, and then later they become cultural centers. Okay, their wealth is what generates the culture and the arts and that kind of stuff. Um, so one thing to also include is that there aren't any kings that are ruling. It's not like one king is ruling over Italy. Okay, it's mainly merchant families, and these merchant families are going to rule together, what we call oligarchies, um, and the minor city-states are essentially sorry. The minor city-states are essentially those that are in orange that you see here. They're going to be absorbed and kind of controlled and influenced by the major ones. Okay, uh, oligarchies are basically a rule of many. So you have many families that have heads, patriarchs, and stuff, and then they are the ones that are in charge of, for example, the Republic of Florence, okay, or the Republic of Venice. They are dominating political, economic, and the cultural environment um, over that city-state. I need to introduce the condottieri, and this means essentially an Italian contractor. Okay, so it's on a contract that you hire someone. In context of the Renaissance, it means that this is a mercenary soldier, and that this is their profession. Right, this is what they do, and they're hired during the Renaissance by city-states in order to fight. As we said, they go to war, and there's a lot of disputes. Okay, so as you see down here, is a drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, and there's different tiers of society, different social classes. I'm going to be talking about the structure. Um, so you have the popolo grosso. This, in translation, means fat people. Yes, okay. The fat people are those that of the nobility in cities. Okay, so one thing to know in these city-states, okay, these are the urban centers, and many cities become these places of development, control, and power. But the rest of Italy is still very much rural. Okay, it's not that there's cities everywhere. So popolo grosso are the urban nobility. They are wealthy merchants, as we said. They are also manufacturers, but they only are about like 5% of the population. And so sometimes they could be a prince of their city, or a duke, or a cardinal, depending where they are, a person of higher social status and authority. Okay. Then you have the mediocri, and this means middle, right? Middle class. They are smaller merchants, but also the master of artisans, those that are not complete at the top, right, but in kind of the upper middle class. And then you have the popolo minuto. This is the little people. Okay, so these are the laborers, the artisans, those that have a job, that have a skill, that are working, right, kind of the working class. And then at the very bottom, of course, you have the peasants and the slaves, and those are the ones that are at the very bottom. Not so much part of the Renaissance at all. Okay, all right. I'm going to be talking about now the different city-states of the five. Okay, I just want to give you some background so you understand what each of them were known for. Florence is inland, as you can see here on the map. They always were, they never really had an established trade because they are inland, right? So compared to Venice and Genoa, they were talking about as the rise of towns. Those are the places where often the Crusades would stop by for merchants, and they would make a lot of money that way. they would make money through banking and trading. Okay, they were also given the authority to raise taxes. Eventually, the florin is the gold coin that's used in Florence, right? And that is going to be the currency that's going to be used throughout Europe. And so, as you can tell, that they're going to be very wealthy because of the interest that they charge at the banks, and they are going to have a family, which called the Medicis, are coming that are going to establish themselves as the banking family. Okay, Florence is known to be always in turmoil, and whether it's through conflict between families or the social classes, or even like, for example, the Black Death. Okay, different types of things is going to hit Florence. They're just kind of the bad luck, right? But even still, they can be resilient through it. Okay, the Black Death did not destabilize Florence, even though, as we read, right, they lost half of their population, right? Half of the population, and on average, many of these city-states are about 100,000 people. Okay, so you have 50,000 people that are gone, and still they're still thriving, okay, and rebuilding. Okay, there's different revolts that are going to come around during the Renaissance. Many workers are going to protest because they are struggling. Okay, but even still, Florence will thrive and be kind of the cultural center. Here's an image of Florence. As you can see, that is the dome. Very close to it is going to be the baptistry and the clock tower right there. Then let's jump and talk about the Medici family. The Medicis would seize control in 1434, and they're going to be in control of Florence, and their power is really through banking and textiles. Okay, so manufacturing textiles, having this commercial system of selling it, and they basically take the wool from England. They can weave it, make it great, sell it for a high price, right? So they charge a premium on it. This generates a lot of wealth. This gives them favor with the papacy. As we talked about, they can charge taxes for the Pope, and also they invest their money, right? They want to say, my money that I'm investing in, right, will make more money. Okay, I buy this wool as an investment, and then it doubles, triples, quadruples in profits. So Cosimo Medici is the first guy that becomes the first political leader. He inherits his father's banking business, and he's going to begin banning rival families. He's going to try to take control for himself in Florence, and so he's going to use manipulation, he's going to use bribery, he's going to use violence, right? He's going to arrange marriages, and he's going to rig a lot of elections to kind of put his family in power, to remain in power, and he used his wealth in that way to bribe them. Okay, so one thing to know that with the amount of wealth, the Medici families are going to be huge patrons of great artists. For Cosimo himself, he's going to be a patron of Donatello and Brunelleschi. They, as a family, are known to be what we call despot rulers, right? Rulers that rule with an iron fist, have complete control and authority, and no one's going to tell them, no one's going to check their power. They are basically like tyrants. Okay, Lorenzo the Magnificent, he is going to be the grandson of Cosimo, and he, just like his grandfather, is going to be a political leader that is kind of like a dictator. Okay, diplomacy was his greatest achievement. He knew, just like his grandfather, how to work people. Okay, how to persuade them and how to build relationships with other leaders as well. He's a poet himself. He has some humanist values. Okay, and one thing to know as well, he was a patron of the arts. His whole family was, right? He was the one who actually brought Michelangelo into his own house, and he would actually like hire him as an artist to live with him, right? Also, Pico della Mirandola, right? He wanted to hire him as well to spread the influence of art, and so. Lorenzo is really kind of a people person. He based his power on his ability just to influence others as his reputation. Him and his brother were actually part of this whole conspiracy where the Pazzi family tried to assassinate the both of them. His brother died, but he was able to survive the assassination. Probably have time to show a video in class on that. From this, Lorenzo is going to be, under him, Florence is going to be the cultural center of Europe, right? So throughout the Renaissance, Florence is going to come up, and this is where at the highest point, Florence is going to be gaining its fame, okay? If you guys recognize these guys, these are Yes, not just the Ninja Turtles, but you have Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, and Donatello. These are all the Renaissance artists in cartoon form. Okay, and so we'll be talking about art in the next lecture after we finish politics. Okay, all right. The next city-state we're going to be talking about is Naples. Naples is actually a principality. Um, it's a kingdom where they do have a king. At first, it's going to be run by France in 1266 to 1435, and they are on the southern part of Italy. Okay, they're the only city-state to really have a king, and eventually Spain is going to come in and take over. They are south of the Papal States, and the thing to know about Naples is that they were dominated by feudal lords. So even though the rest of Italy doesn't really have a feudal system, they still have a feudal system in the south, and they would often challenge the ruler's power. In the north, you have a lot of merchants and stuff, but in the south, it's still somewhat of a feudal system. The nobles, the Naples would be still vulnerable to be attacked by outsiders. Okay, so one of the main empires we talked about is the Ottoman Empire, and so the Ottoman Turks were the ones to first come through Naples and invade them. Over time, the French are going to come in as well to take them out too. Okay, the Papal States is the center part. They are run by the popes, right? And the popes are the ones that have great political authority, but supposedly a lot of spiritual authority as well. Okay, so this is where Rome is. Okay, in that center yellow region. The popes are supposed to be the spiritual leaders because they are elected for life, right? The thing is, during the Renaissance, it's going to take a turn for the worse, and people are going to view them very negatively, and we're going to bring up some examples of that later on. Pope Julius II is going to be called the warrior pope, and he's going to actually improve the boundaries of the Papal States because of his military and political strength that he will begin to take over certain smaller states. He's going to also join the Papal States with the Venetians, and if there's any French invaders, which we're going to talk about later, France will come in to invade Italy. He's going to be working with them to kick them out. How did the Papal States increase power? Well, they would tax, right, because they have the authority from the Catholic Church, and they're going to have their own papal army, right? We talk about professional soldiers, the condottieri, and so they're going to have their own army and navy, and they're going to extend their papal diplomacy, really using their spiritual authority as a way to influence other people. They're going to be great patrons of the arts. Their focus is not so much on the human, but using the skill of artists to create a lot of church architecture and designs and paintings that reflect God still. Okay. All right. We talk about Milan. It's also part of this general region called Lombardy. They are a principality. Okay. They have a prince. They have the signory, which is essentially a despot ruler, a ruler that rules with the iron fist, right? A dictator. They are a military state. Okay. They don't really focus on culture and arts. They're a very aggressive city. They always have enemies, and they're going to be in constant warfare with their neighbors. The two families that are going to be in charge of Milan is the Visconti family. They're going to rule until about 1447, and at that time, there's no male heir to continue on, and so this principality is then going to be a republic for a short time. Then the Sforza family is going to come in to overthrow it, and they're going to be the ones to take over. Okay. A few things. Okay, one, Milan's going to be known to be enemies, mainly with Venice, who's also in the north, and also Florence, which is just south of Milan too. And they're going to duke it out in some of the wars of Italy. And they will be thriving economically based upon their textile manufacturing, and also they would be able to do some trade, even if they are a landlocked nation. Okay. All right, Venice, let's move on. We talked about Venice before. They're the ones during the Crusades with a lot of trade. They accumulate a lot of wealth. They're going to be a republic, okay, and they're going to have what we call a Doge. A Doge is a kind of a president. He's a chief executive. He's elected for life. There is a Senate as well in Venice, and they are basically the nobles, right? They have nobility, and they are the ones that are being elected by other patricians, which we call other landowners. Okay, so landowners are voting for landowners, and that's what we call the Great Council. Venetian city-state itself is going to be the most cohesive in the sense where when foreign invaders do come in, they're going to be the last one to actually fall to the Ottoman Empire, but eventually all of Italy will fall to foreign invaders. We'll get to that. Okay. All right. So that's the 5. Let's talk about what is this thing called diplomacy. Okay. Diplomacy is the relationships between nations, right, through political leadership. During the Renaissance, okay, it's going to be what we call it the established modern diplomatic system. Okay. So you have medieval diplomacy where they're just like if I'm a diplomat, right, during the Middle Ages, my role is that I'm just a servant. And we're all Christian, and we're here just to promote peace as much as we can. Okay. Whereas in the Renaissance, in a lot of city-states, they are sending individuals out, right? I mean, they call these ambassadors, and they're sending them out to kind of represent their home territories, right? So these ambassadors are an agent of the home territory, and they're going to use any methods possible, right, to be very diplomatic, right, that would benefit the interests of their state. So if I'm an ambassador of Walnut, California, you send me over to, let's just say, Los Angeles, right? I'm going to see what we can do in learning and what can I do to benefit my city, right? And this is what we're going to say is the birth of modern politics, because ambassadors are going to take that role of learning how to build relationships with other countries for better or for worse, even going to war, okay? Then we get to the decline of Italy. Italy will come up to a point where they are thriving, right? But towards the end of the Renaissance, there's going to be some economic decline in the northern Italian regions. But even what will really set it apart is the internal struggles of a lot of city-states and also the foreign invasion. So in Florence, there's a guy named Girolamo Savonarola, and so he's really a preacher, and he's come to Florence to really criticize what's happening in Florence because of the Renaissance, that what the Medicis have brought into Florence was a terrible thing, and many Florentines thought that his charisma and preaching, his zeal, right, was, wow, we should listen to this guy. And he would criticize Lorenzo and saying that you are promoting pagan art, right, the frivolous living that you choose to live like, you're like a tyrant, you don't care about what's really true. And he's saying that he's very immoral in the things, right? And so he's very fiery in his speech. He's prophesying and saying that there's going to be a day of judgment that's very similar to what the Bible is saying. He's kind of bringing it's coming very soon, and there's going to be someone that will avenge the Catholic Church, and it's going to reform the Church. And even the Pope, he'll criticize the Pope of how corrupt he is too, many times. Charles VIII is the king of France at this time. When he's in Florence, and he's saying that, oh, there is this king that's coming. He is the avenger that will change all of this. And he's basically criticizing everything around him. He's saying that the Medicis are the ones that have brought immorality to Florence, and he wanted to then establish a theocracy. Okay, a theocracy is basically a religious type of run government. Charles VIII is going to invade France, and at that point, the Medici is going to be out, and he is going to come in and establish this republic that is based upon Christian values, right? And saying now Christ is the king of Florence, and he's going to continue to preach these fiery sermons, and he's going to hire young people to be the moral police, and he's going to have these things what we call the bonfires, right? But they're not just any type of fun bonfires you sit around and talk. But these are called the bonfires of the vanities, right? And so any items of luxury, playing cards, gambling items, dice, ornaments, jewelry, mirrors, okay, makeup that women would use, right? All these things are luxurious. You don't need them, right? It's distracting you from what's real in life, what's really important, and that's God. And so any books that were from pagan writers, right, classical writings and poets, they were publicly burned in these giant bonfires, right? And they're saying that even these paintings that cost so much, right, that of portraits in the nude, you just burn them all, right? And so Savonarola was a guy that was very extreme, to say the least, right? And he's going to be so daring that he's going to criticize Pope Alexander VI and how he was acting and stuff. How did the Florentines react? They said, you know what, this guy is just way too out there. He's extreme, and they don't like this religious extremism to a point, right? So at first they accepted him, but they felt that he was way too much. And eventually he will be burned at the stake, as you can see here in this picture. So as Italy declines, we're going to talk about what were some of those events, right? So we talked about internal, but externally, there's going to be feuding and fighting. Okay, so first there's the wars in Lombardy. The reasons and cause for it was that Venice was looking to expand towards inland into the mainland so they could gain more wealth, and so war breaks out between Milan and Venice over fighting over markets. And what comes out of the fight is that a lot of these smaller city-states are going to be absorbed, right? The economy of Milan, of Lombardy, this area is going to be ruined. Venice is going to be also weaker because you have the Ottoman Turks that are coming in from the east, and they're going to eventually take Constantinople in 1453. Okay, we talked about this before. And so because of that, in the end, in 1454, 1 year later, right, you have the Ottoman Empire on the rise, and finally Italy's weaker now, but they have a peace treaty called the Peace of Lodi. The Peace of Lodi is saying there's a peace between Milan and Venice, and they're going to have an alliance for a short period of time. Okay, and then later Florence is going to come in, and they're going to have an agreement with Naples, and so Florence, Milan, and Venice, and Naples, the main four, are going to be allied with each other for about a few decades, and it's going to be peaceful until the foreign invaders do come in. The weaknesses, as I said, is that though you have a foreign policy that works, they have a treaty that works between these city-states. Foreign policy was not ever discussed, so they were never really working with each other in case foreign invaders were to come in. And so there's powerful monarchies that are growing that we're going to be talking about in France and in Spain at this time, and they're looking at Italy saying, like, we can take these people, right? Because they're just a small city-state. They're not like us, like a big country, and we want to take their wealth, right? And so that's the main weakness, is foreign invaders are coming. So the War of Italy's break out. So about for 40 years, we're going to see that there is peace, but the political fragmentation of Italy is what hurts them from foreign invaders. It's not that they have economic wealth and they can't work with each other, right? Culturally, economically, they're still developing as themselves, but when it came down to foreign invaders, they could not fend them off because they didn't work together. So they're being vulnerable to outsiders, and France and Spain are picking that up. And as these power-hungry kings are looking at Italy, right, they're looking to invade as soon as possible. So the Wars of Italy breaks out, and you have France take the first move, and the Duke of Milan, from the Sforza family, would invite the French to come in to take out its enemies. Okay, and so Charles VIII is the king at the time, and he's going to accept and say, all right, Milan, let's work together. He sends 30,000 men, and he heads towards Naples. Okay, he heads towards Naples, and so now Naples feels like they're being backstabbed from this. Okay, and essentially you have the Papal States that's kind of right there and says, you know what, Pope at the time, Pope Leo X, he's going to say, all right, we need some backup. We don't want France to take over Italy, right? So he calls upon the Holy Roman Empire, and he calls upon Spain, and says that please kick the French out of Italy. So you have basically two major families, the Valois family and the Habsburgs. Valois from France, Habsburgs from Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, and they are now basically fighting on these grounds, on Italian grounds, and then Italy is just kind of in the middle, taking the crossfire. Okay, so it's going to be a struggle for power between these two major families, and for 15 years they're going to fight. Eventually, we see in 1527 Rome is going to be sacked by the Germans, and this will temporarily end the war. So the wars in Italy will come to an end, but not just fighting will end, but essentially the Renaissance growth that was happening will come to an end too, symbolically at the sacking of Rome, because that was the capital at the time. That was kind of like, you know, the headquarters of the Catholic Church, and a lot of the cultural dynamic that's coming through there at that time too. This is a drawing called A Forest of Pikes, and this is showing all the German and Swiss pikemen that were fighting at the time during the Italian Wars. Very brutal. Okay, what's significant is there's a guy, right, Machiavelli, Niccolo Machiavelli, at the time that's observing all of this, right, and he comes up and he establishes the book The Prince, right? It's written in 1513, and why was he even writing this book? He was first interested in human nature, okay, and human beings were generally, from what he understood, evil and selfish, and so he began to think, how should a ruler rule, right? If you were a prince, how should you rule? What's the best way to rule? And he thinks that, you know what, a prince must essentially manipulate people in order to reach their goals for their kingdom or for the nation. The Prince, as a book, is kind of a manual, a handbook for dictators, and they're going to follow a lot of the principles that he says. Machiavelli was a Republican at heart, but he saw, you know what, we're weak as Italian republics, right? We're not very strong because we cannot withstand these great kingdoms and leaders, right? So he said, you know what, for a leader to succeed, the end justifies the means. Whatever the results are, you are given the justification to do whatever you want. Okay? Good leaders knew how to exercise their powers, right? And he analyzed them and said, you know what? If they do bad things, it's okay because the end justifies their means. If the ruler is selfish and power hungry, that's okay because they're going to be successful in getting what they want. And so he says, it is better to be feared than loved. Okay, that's another quote that he says. And so this is kind of foreshadowing the coming of age where politics and religions kind of go apart, and it's going to be more secular, right? In the sense where building your country, building your state, and establishing political authority does not need to be justified by religion saying, like, God has called me to take over your land, and I'm going to take it, right? You just go ahead and do it. And he also mentions how a leader, a prince, must adopt the ways of a fox and a lion, and essentially you must be cunning, you must be practical like a fox, but also aggressive like a lion. Okay. All right, in closing, we're going to go over some of the popes that are really important. What were the popes like during the Renaissance? During the Middle Ages, we understand they're like the spiritual authority, but after the Great Schism, right, the end of the Great Schism, that's where these Renaissance popes start coming out, and they're going to lose a lot of authority and influence, right? And going into the Reformation is a time where it was a really bad time for the popes. So their interests during the Renaissance were very temporal, right? They're very worldly of now. They weren't even spiritual that much, right? And so many people saw it this way. They saw that, you know what, these popes are very corrupt, right? And they would criticize them a lot. They would use different things. One was intrigue. This means that they were doing a lot of secret planning to do something detrimental to someone, something harmful to someone. They would do it and plan it in secret. They would plan assassinations, even as an example, of ways to meet their own goals. Nepotism, you really need to know this word. They would use this in order to promote interests of their family staying in power, and they would show favors. Okay, so to show favoritism to their families is what nepotism is. It comes from the Greek word meaning nephew, and as an example, you have like Pope Sixtus the Fourth that would make a lot of his nephews cardinals. Okay, so passing on certain privileges and rights to their family is a bad thing because they're being biased, right? And they are just doing it out of a selfish reason. One thing to know is that they are great patrons of the arts, and Rome is going to be a place where we're going to see St. Peter's Basilica, right? And the Vatican Museum, it's going to have a lot of different types of art, even a lot of classical, pagan-looking things, okay? So if you can see this kind of poster on the right, you have the Pope and the Emperor, and it's a political cartoon, right? And it's showing there's a struggle between the Pope and the Emperor, okay? This poster is really showing that the Holy Roman Empire has, has been supporting the Pope in a sense, but really they're struggling for power, saying who has real authority. And in the time of the Renaissance, the Pope over the Papal States held power like a prince would during that time of in that region of the Papal States. Okay, so some of the popes. Very quickly, we have Rodrigo Borgia, who also renamed himself to be Pope Alexander VI. He was a very immoral guy, sexual all the time. He was a debaucher, and he had a son. Okay, and he made a lot of his family cardinals. And even though that they were like illegitimate and he's not supposed to be having sex at all, he does. And he's very much scandalized because he wanted his son Caesar Borgia, who Machiavelli reveres so much, says, Caesar, I want you to create your own state, right? Coming out of papal state grounds and lands, right? Carve a state out for yourself. So just to go very quickly over Caesar Borgia, he is a condottieri, he's a warrior, he's a nobleman, he's a politician, and Machiavelli kind of looks up to him very much and describes a lot of things that he did in The Prince. Even though through his ruthlessness and a lot of sexual corruption, Machiavelli overlooks that. Okay, and then on the right you have Lucrezia Borgia. She will have 7 or 8 children, and even through that, she's going to be known to be part of the Renaissance papacy line. That's right of having children outside of her lover, right, and with many different people at a time, which just shows that's not good, right? Okay, Pope Julius II, the warrior pope, involved in war and politics. He's going to lead armies, right? He actually tore down the old Basilica of St. Peter in Rome, built by Constantine, but he's going to start rebuilding it his way, okay, the way that he desired to be. It won't finish through him, but he's going to start rebuilding St. Peter's, and the current St. Peter's today started by him. In the bottom left-hand corner, you see Julius II's illegitimate daughter, so you can see that all these popes are very scandalous, right, and often, going outside of what a normal pope would do. Okay, Pope Leo X, really important guy. This was he was the son of Lorenzo. Okay, he was an enthusiastic patron himself. Why is he famous? Is because it was him with Martin Luther in the Protestant Reformation, which we'll get to, that he said, you know what, Martin Luther is a heretic, he must recant, and he was there at the Diet of Worms with Charles V. Okay, all right. So one thing to know is that under Pope Leo X, the main problem with the Catholic Church was the sale of indulgences to finance, yes, St. Peter's Basilica. And the last pope is Pope Clement VII. And the last pope is Pope Clement VII, which is a cousin of Leo X, and he is the one who will refuse Henry VIII to divorce his wife, and which will start the English Reformation. Okay, so these Renaissance popes are really important because each of them are part of this major event. That's all you need to know about them. They all are great patrons of the arts. They all are of bad moral character, and his dad was the one that was assassinated in the Pazzi assassination.